We're in the midst of a series called Strength for the Storms of Life. We began last week, and we indicated that a couple things. Number one, the storms happen. And storms happen when two sets of desires collide with one another. What happens with a weather storm when two weather fronts collide and they produce rain and lightning, heat and light. And when two sets of desires collide, they create storms as well. And we find there are windy words and lightning glares and rainy eyes. Storms can be constructive or destructive. The results can be beneficial or catastrophic. In the wake of storms, between people, we can experience closer relationships, actually, and deeper relationships. There's a level of sharing that happens when we care deeply about something that we really can learn to and connect with one another and become closer, and our connection with one another can become deeper, or they can be destructive, that not closeness but distance is created by the storm, and a pattern of distance, or it leads people to relate in a very shallow way. So it doesn't go closer and deeper. Storms between people can cause there to be dynamics where it's distant and shallow. And we need strength to weather storms. And that's what we're going to talk about. We will be talking about for the next weeks. And this morning we're going to talk about parental storms. The closer the relationship, the stronger the storm. You know what the song says, you always hurt the one you love. This seems to be true. It is easier to treat casual friends more evenly than it is loved ones, husbands and wives, sons or daughters, mothers or fathers. It's easier to treat friends and acquaintances more evenly, more in a balanced way. When dealing with loved ones, mates or children, the ups and downs are more forceful. I think that loved ones trigger stronger, more uncontrollable reactions. And this morning we'll talk about a couple things that relate to parents and children. It could also relate to dealing with mates or dealing with friends. And the encouragement will be this: deal with the storm within you, then deal with the storm between you. Begins with dealing with the storm within you. How do you know that there's a storm within you? We react differently to storms. Some of us, our storms are heat storms. When we sense that we are colliding, our desires are colliding, we get hot. We boil. And words come out fast and angry. Others of us don't react in a hot way. We create an ice storm, which is we become freezing, cold, withdrawn. And so we know that there is a storm happening if we're boiling inside or if we're freezing inside. And when boiling or freezing in conflict with a person, the chances are the connection will not happen. It will not go closer or deeper when emotions run very high. And that's when you might want to engage in a storm weathering strategy. And one of the ones we talked relative to husbands and wives is require slow pulses. And when a child brings up an issue 5 minutes from home, I think sometimes as parents we feel that we have to give an answer. We have to give an answer now. So in the heat of this thing, I got to come up. And the truth is, no, we don't. Sometimes making a quick decision, tempests flare, things get hot. And sometimes it's better to say in a respectful way, you know what, I'm going to give that some thought, and let's talk about it in an hour or later on this afternoon. Let's talk about it in an hour. And at that time, it doesn't lead to an escalation, which will lead to a heat storm or an ice storm. Deal with the storms within you, and sometimes you have to take a break to do that. There's a couple things. Know your heart. Know your heart. That's part of, I think, what it means to deal with the storms within us. We have to know our heart. A couple things about that in terms of know your heart. Look what the verse says, James chapter 4. It's in your worship folder. It says, what causes fights and quarrels among you? We will allude to this verse frequently over the next couple of weeks and just go back to it. It's one of those verses that makes just a lot of sense from a biblical truth perspective, which is what the Bible is, from a psychological perspective, from just a social perspective. This is the way things are. Apparently, look what he says. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires or pleasures that battle within you? That word literally for desires is pleasures. You want something, but don't get it. You kill and covet, but you cannot have what you want. You quarrel and fight. He's making a couple points here. Conflict between us is caused by conflict within us. Conflict this way is the byproduct of conflict this way. So, doesn't it make sense then, if it comes from here, we have to deal with the storm within us in order to deal with the storm between us. In order to deal with the battle between us, we must deal with the battle within us. Pleasures wage war within us to capture more and more territory and bring it under its control. Pleasures wage war within us to gain increased control over us so that more and more of our thoughts and attitudes and actions are devoted to getting things that we want and getting rid of things that we don't want. Again, the word for warfare is about expanded control. That's literally what the word means. It means to spread out. And when somebody is waging war, then in terms of this word for war, they are spreading out. And the sense is spreading out for the purpose of expanded dominance and expanded control. If I only own this and I want to own that, one way I can do that is go to war, because there's individuals that protect that rule over. So if I wanted to gain this section, I would have to go to war with that, and if I conquered, then I would have you, this section. Maybe that would be okay for a while. But pleasures within us, they don't just want to stop at one section, mind. They don't want to just control our mind. Maybe this is thoughts. And thoughts are related to mind, but you're protected, so I wage a war with them to capture you. Thoughts, now I have intellect and thoughts, and pleasures continue to want to conquer territory, to bring more and more of our life in line so that more of our time, talent, and treasure is invested in pursuing pleasurable purposes. Our pleasures bark out orders, and desires scurry within us to move to meet the demands. So conflict between us is triggered by our need to get what we want. And when those who are most committed, those whom we are most committed to, have conflicting desires that clash, storms break out fiercely. In terms of knowing our heart, a couple things. I crave what I desire. This isn't just me. We crave, but if you personalize this, I crave what I desire. I crave what I desire. We have things that we want. I crave them. I have things that I don't want. I crave to get rid of them. So I crave what I want, and here's the difficult thing. When those who matter most don't fulfill my desires, it feels like betrayal. When those who matter most don't fulfill my desires, it feels like betrayal. And here's the thing to know in terms of dealing with the battle within. It's what makes it most difficult. The reason why we become so hot or cold, why we become boiling or freezing, is because when people don't fulfill our desires, we take it personally. Now, you'd like to say, well, I don't. You do. We all do. It's the way we're wired. And so knowing this, you're not going to be able to turn this off. What I'm telling you is just the way things are. And we're wise when we deal with things as they are. We take things personally, especially if it's a husband or a wife or a child or a mom or a dad. And when they don't fulfill our desires, it feels like betrayal to us. And that's why we become boiling and freezing, why we become involved in heat storms or ice storms. Storms break out. Storms break out. I try to capture a sense that when I think, I journal. And that's one thing I'm going to do. It's hard to get in touch with things inside until we find a way to be quiet. Life is so loud and so fast. And in terms of finding ways to cultivate solitude, I'm going to suggest that you try to do that. If it's a walk, a discussion with a close friend that you're very comfortable with. Some of you draw and are artistic. That's a way to create solitude. I journal. And when I journal, I find that I can quiet down. I can pay attention to what's happening inside. If things are really jumbled up, going to a trusted friend or to a skilled counselor is another place where you can learn to be quiet and calm down. But that's an important skill. I tried to get a hold of what it is that I feel when I don't have what I want. And I tried to put it, it kind of came to me once. It's what it feels like to me in terms of a picture. See if it relates to you. Let's call that the island of good. That's the island of good, and this is water. We're floating in the water, each of us on our individual raft. Can you do that? And there's the island of good, and we're floating in the middle of this water. And on the island of good is when things happen the way we want them to happen. Our kids look exactly like we want them to look on the island of good. If we want them to be athletes, they're athletes. If we want them to be smart, they're smart. If we want them to get along with their brother and sister, they get along with their brother and sister on the island of good. And we can think of all kinds of things. It's when our mate looks like we want and they do what we want. That's what happens on the island of good. The problem is we're not there. We're out at sea, and all of us on our individual rafts, we don't have all that we want. There's things on the island of good that we don't connect with. And there's a couple things that I'm aware of in terms of my reactions when I think of what I have that I don't want and what I want that I don't have. And I'm stuck out here, and I'm aware of a couple different kinds of things in terms of feelings. I am sad at one level because I'd really like to be there. And I'm being drawn out to sea by this current, and it's kind of drifting further and further away the longer it goes. Seems like the older you are, the more you realize you're not going to get to where you thought you'd get to. It can be difficult, and there's a sadness that is created by that. But not just a sadness, an anger. An anger. And the anger can turn two different ways. What's wrong? You can be angry at the people that are supposed to be doing what you want them to do. Some of us focus our anger outwards, externally, contempt. It drips out of us, and it drips onto others. Some of us, and I'm more this variety, we pour our contempt inside. And what I've sensed is the current that's drawing me away from the island of good is the current of my defects of character. That's what's pulling me away. I can't even ask for what I want, or I ask too harshly. I'm being drawn away from that place, and I feel sad and angry, and that's what it feels like, disquieted. When I put my finger on the pulse of what I feel when I'm aware of when I don't have frustrated desires, that's what I feel. But there's another thing that seems to be close to that. Alone. Alone. No matter how close you are with your son or daughter, husband or wife, mom or dad, there are some things that you can't share with them about yourself. And when you don't have what you want and have what you don't want, it seems to intensify our sense of being isolated and alone. Can you relate to that? That's what it feels like to me. At one level, it's sad and angry, but then there's another emotion that's quieter. The feeling of being alone, abandoned, betrayed. And it's important to know that feeling is lurking. In fact, what I'd suggest, the feeling of aloneness and abandonment is the one that's poking pins into the feelings of sad and angry. That's where it comes from. Boing, sad, angry. But underneath that, it's about alone. It's the feelings of being abandoned. And that's the one we've got to deal with. That's what it feels like on my raft. Does it feel like that to you? It's important to deal with the alone feeling because I think it's powerful. Okay, so here's a question. How do we deal with the storms within us? We know our heart and we quiet our heart. How do we quiet our stormy hearts? That's the question. We can do one or two things. We can focus on our desires first. And I could see what I want and go after it. I'm going to go after it. I'm going to get my kids to do what kids do on the island of good. I'm going to get my wife to do what wives do or husbands do on the island of good. I'm going to get the boss to do what bosses do on that island. And I'm going to satisfy my desires. And I'm going to talk to him and talk to her and change him. And we try to satisfy our desires. And if that doesn't work, because we can never fully satisfy our desires, just can't work, we try to silence them. Okay, if I can't get there, I won't want to get there. I'm not going to look. I'm not looking. I'm not looking. I don't want to be there. I don't want what happened. I don't even know the island of good exists. We try to silence our desires, which works for a while until you see that family that is exactly like you want your family to be. And then, I can't look at them now. So life gets pretty small when we try to silence our desires. Or, can't do those two, submerge them. I know, when I'm 3 sheets to the wind, I don't think of what I want. And you can submerge them with alcohol or with money. When I'm at work making a bunch of money or investing, I'm not aware of my desires. It covers them over. The only problem is you need more stuff to get less relief. And what ends up happening with addiction is that the stuff not only doesn't bring quiet, it starts to bring disquiet. And then you're in a mess. We can try to satisfy, silence, or submerge. None of those works. Because at one point, we still feel alone. And even if I can make you do what I want you to do, you know what I'm thinking deep down inside? Why did I have to make you do that? If you cared about me, you would have done it already. So even if I can make you do it, it still doesn't feel good. Or if I go away and don't say anything and do ice stuff, I'm still aware that you're not doing what I want you to do and that apparently I don't matter enough to you. How do we deal with that? Even when I focus on my desires and get what I want, I still feel alone. And that's why I think we focus on promises first. We did this last week. Let's just try it again. I want you to think of, if you're a parent or a kid, either one, there's ways your parents treat you that you don't like at all. Think about how irritating that is. If you're a parent, you've got a kid. You want your kid to be athletic, they're not. You want them to be smarter than they are, they're not. You want them to be more disciplined, spend less time doing video games. And they spend all the time doing video games. Okay, just think about that. Think about it. Thinking about it, put your hands in your pockets or you're going to whack someone. I want you to think about that feeling. In fact, close your eyes and think about it. What do you say to your kid? Well, what have you said in those discussions? Think about it. And then I'm going to throw this thought in your head. Here's what God says. Be still. Be still. And know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. You keep on thinking about your kid, and I'm going to say that again. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. I can't say that and have something inside not go, why? Because it's hitting the alone thing. And underneath your sadness and your anger and your rage and your ice and your heat is loneliness. And when you hit that, it's as if it takes the fuel away from the sadness. Did you feel something calm down? Over time, as you continue to allow thoughts like this to remain in your mind, as you grab thoughts like this, they will become increasingly powerful. That is the truth. That's why we had a summer to remember. That's why there's some things from the Bible that you want to grab and you want to keep in your head because they touch you at places that no one else can touch you. I think that's how change happens. Then, deal with the storms within you. Know your heart. Quiet your heart. And then share your heart. Look what it says in that verse. You do not have because you do not ask God. And when you ask, you do not receive because you ask with wrong motives that you may spend when you get on your pleasures. So he's talking to this community, and the problems that they're experiencing in this community are happening in church. So it's not family problems, it's sacred problems. But if we ask them about what the problem is, they'd point fingers, and James says, oh no, it's not between you, it's really in you. And by the way, he says to them, and I know you pray about things, but when you're praying about things so that your pleasures can be met, guess what? You're not going to get what you're asking for. So we say, well, what's... To the degree my prayers are driven by the desire to quiet my heart by getting what I want, they're pleasure driven. I'm going to say that, and again, we can't fix that. That's not fixable. So you say, okay, I will not want pleasure. I won't want it. Don't want it, don't want it. That doesn't work. You can't do that. But just so that we know, to the degree my prayers are driven by the desire to quiet my heart by getting what I want, they're pleasure driven. We do that all the time with our kids. Oh God, I pray that you give Jimmy all A's. Why? Because I'll be happier when he gets all A's. No, I hope Jimmy gets all A's. But can your heart be quiet if Jimmy doesn't get all A's? That's the question. What is the basis of your quietness? Because you get what you want. You get your kids to get what you want. Do I? And again, this is not just your problem. This is all of us. Especially in a nation in which we can afford pleasures. This is a dire problem for America because we can get so much of what we want, or what pleases us temporarily. Okay, so to the degree my prayers are driven by the desires to quiet my heart by getting what I want, they're pleasure driven. We do this all the time as parents. We want to ask God to help our kids change so that our hearts would be quiet when they're doing what we want. Fine, but just know that those prayers are pleasure driven. And God's not disposed. In fact, what God will do sometimes when He loves us is He puts us in the wilderness. And the wilderness is a place where we don't have what we want, so that we can separate coming to God to get what we want with getting strength from God. The fact is, God can strengthen you, even when He doesn't give you what you want. You say, how does that work? Tell you what, you try to become better at knowing your heart and then quieting your heart by focusing on His promises. And it's not magic, but over time, you will develop a capacity to have a quiet heart even when you don't have what you want. Now, I'm not there, but I'm getting closer to there. I'm farther into that than I used to be. See, you know what freedom is? Freedom is not being content when I have what I want. Freedom is not being content because I have what I want. Here's what freedom is. Freedom is being content even when I don't have what I want. That comes when I know my heart and I quiet my heart by focusing on His promises. I don't feel so alone. And then I share my heart and I say, you know what, God, I really would like this or that, and that's okay. He wants us to talk to Him, but He wants us to talk to Him with a quiet heart. When you talk to God in prayer, know your heart, quiet your heart first. Just even that promise, think about the fact that He's always with you. Then your pulse will slow. Then pray to Him. God, I really do ask that Heidi does well in school. I want it to succeed, but now the prayers are softer, calmer. You know that there's a connection between you and God. Deal with the storm within you first, then deal with the storm between you. Deal with the storm between you. Way to do that is connection. Connect with your child's feelings. A couple quotes from a book, Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children by John Gottman, indicates much of today's popular advice to parents ignores the world of emotion. Instead, it relies on child-rearing theories that address children's misbehavior, but disregard the feelings that underlie that misbehavior. And he would suggest then that emotional intelligence is a critical commodity. Somebody who has a high IQ but can't get along with people is not going to be an effective manager, worker, team member, etc. A lot of the things that make for success come because of the ability to harness and focus emotions. Therefore, He said it behooves us as parents to help our kids identify and manage their emotions. That makes sense, doesn't it? That makes sense. And we train our children to relate to their emotions. And as we'll say, some of us didn't really have great modeling. We tend to treat our emotions in the way our parents treated our emotions. Now, I'm going to say this. That doesn't mean we're stuck. We can make progress, especially if we learn to quiet our heart. We're going to say some things over the next weeks, but that has the potential to be tremendously beneficial to you. Know your heart and quiet your heart by focusing on His promises, then share. Things come down and things grow. But not all of us were raised in a place where we regard emotions very well. We'll talk a little bit more about that. John Gottman also says, in my research, I discovered that love by itself wasn't enough. Love described as warm and affirming. He went on, very concerned, warm, and involved parents often had attitudes toward their own children's emotions that got in the way of them being able to talk to their children when they were sad or afraid or angry. The secret lay in how parents interacted with their children when emotions ran hot. And that's what he says is something that we want in parenting to be able to get better at, which is when our children's emotions are there and are active and strong, to set limits on the behaviors but not on the feelings, we'll suggest, because we want them to know about their feelings so that they can manage them. If we say, don't feel that way, we don't make the emotion go away. All we could teach him is that when you have a feeling, don't have it. Step on your feelings. And you know what happens with feelings that get stepped on and pushed down? Do they go away? Do they? They come out sideways. They'll come out, but then we have no control over how they come out. They'll come out in terms of our body or mind or any one of a number of different ways. In Chinese, in terms of connecting with your child's feelings, the character representing opportunity is encompassed within the character for crisis. So the Chinese character for opportunity is within the character for crisis. Within a crisis, there's opportunity. That's especially true in parenting. Nowhere is the linking of these two concepts of crisis and opportunity more apt than in our role as parents. Whether the crisis is a broken balloon, a failing math grade, or the betrayal of a friend, negative experiences can serve as great opportunities to empathize and build intimacy with our children, to teach them the way to handle feelings. The secret to successful parenting is based on things that just make sense. Love and affection for the child and demonstrated through empathy and understanding. Good parenting comes when you understand your child's feelings and communicate an understanding. There's an empathy that you are coming alongside. And when you come alongside your child in their feelings, you teach them to relate to their feelings. And if they can relate to their feelings, they then can feel them and direct them, not be directed by them. And that's what we want to help them to know. But we can't do that until we've connected. So another thing we'll say relative to parenting, connection, then correction. Yeah, you're going to correct your kid. You're going to correct them. The behaviors that aren't appropriate. But connection, then correction. Why? Because he wants to know that he's not on a raft alone. That's what he wants to know. And if you come alongside and are with him in his feelings or her, connection, then correction. Then you're together and the defenses aren't raised. In its most basic form, empathy is the ability to feel what another person is feeling. It's the ability to put yourself in your child's shoes and respond accordingly. Just because it's simple, it's not easy. Emotional awareness doesn't come naturally to many of us because in order to be aware of our child's emotion, guess what? We have to be aware of our own. And some of us weren't raised in places where that's very natural to us. The way our parents raised us affects our ability to relate to our emotions. I'm going to say this again. We are not trapped by how our parents raised us. That is not true. We can make progress. However, how we're raised does impact us. And some of us who were raised in a dismissive way, and I'll talk about what that is, can make progress. But that will always be the elastic that we will have to fight. Some of us were raised in homes that dismissed emotions. That was like, oh, don't feel like that. You don't think that. Don't talk like that. And it was that emotions are dismissed. You don't have that feeling. You know what ends up happening? If I'm taught that I don't have the feeling, guess what I do as a parent? You don't feel that way. So the way I was taught to deal with my emotions, I pass on and I treat my kids in the same way. Why? Because that's what's normal. When you have an emotion, how am I feeling right now? I'm going to know my heart. I really wish that I just didn't drop and break that microphone. But I'm going to quiet my heart. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted in the heavens and on the earth. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. God, I pray that this microphone can be fixed. See, it works. I feel calmer already. And God led Randy to come up and fix it. See, prayers work, especially if you quiet your... Some of us were raised in homes that didn't dismiss emotion, but disapproved of them. Emotion not only was something to not have, it was something that you need, and it was bad to have an emotion. And guess what you do then? The natural reaction as parents, if your kids has an emotion, will be what? Well, to treat emotions like emotions need to be treated. Don't do that! And again, that will be the natural. Some of us were raised in places where they weren't dismissed or disapproved of. They were indulged. And so if you had an emotion, it was, Jim, stop the car. Andy has an emotion. What is it? And everything stopped when somebody had an emotion. It was like, freeze! And so we felt like when we have an emotion, it's when everything doesn't have to stop. But the way we're raised has a tendency to impact how we relate to our kids. The first step parents can take towards raising children is to understand their own style of dealing with emotion and how it affects their kids. The path to being a better parent starts with, again, two things, kind of knowing ourselves, and it really does help when you know your heart and can quiet it. Because when you can quiet it, then you can look inside and say, what am I feeling? It's easier to get inside when your heart's quiet. At the retreat, we'll do a couple things. We'll talk about spiritual gifts, which will give us an opportunity to know our giftedness. We'll talk about natural talents, and it really is helpful. I found out that intellection and learning, two of my talent themes that I'm always thinking, and it helps me because that explains why I can go to McDonald's and people can talk to me, and, well, I can't hear well. Okay, that's part of it. But I can just get lost in thought, and I felt like, what's wrong with me? Nothing's wrong with me. That's what I do, and I can turn that into a strength. And we'll be talking about it. You'll come away with knowing your 5 talent things, and that will be a great thing to know. And especially as you hear other people talking about theirs, and you can see, oh, you're like that, and I'm not like that. And when you learn about yourself, it really will help you function. Now, it's not God, but it really provides one aspect of insight. When we become aware of ourselves, it's really a good thing. This would be a great opportunity. And we'll also talk about how to experience strength. I'll give you some promises that you can grab hold of. Opportunity for you to get away outside in the fall. Walk around. You'll have opportunities to quiet your heart. It's going to be a great thing. And again, I encourage you, sign up quick. Sign up today. The cost is minimal. Gosh, it's like nothing. If you want to stay, it's a little bit more, but you'll get a book with that, and you'll be able to know this stuff, and it'll be well worth your time. And we'll take care of your kids. Okay, enough of the sales thing. Developing deeper awareness requires times of solitude. Okay, I'm not done with the sales thing. When was the last time you had time to be quiet? What about a walk in the woods? Things to think about. Okay, now I'm done with the sales thing. Okay. Develop some way, meditation, prayer, journaling, or artistic expression. Connection, then correction. Connect with your child's feelings. Correction, a couple things quickly. Set limits on behavior, not feelings. Set limits on behavior, not feelings. And this is helped when you've connected with your kid. You connected with your child. And when you connect with them, they don't feel so alone. Then you can set limits on behaviors and they feel safer. Don't try to set limits first. Be there and connect with them. Again, setting limits on behaviors, but trying to listen for feelings. But put limits on behaviors. Some behaviors are not appropriate. You have to set limits on them. It doesn't help them to learn to act out. And they'll learn, hopefully, over time, to be able to think and be able to get in touch with how they're feeling. Then, help children solve problems. And again, this is in Raising Emotionally Intelligent Children by John Gottman. Interesting book, not a Christian book. Very practical advice. And what he suggests is that when you've connected with your child, and then you start to correct, and you do that, you don't set limits on feelings, but on behaviors, then you say, let's talk about the problem. Do you talk about the problem first? No. Connection, then correction. Let's solve the problem. No. Connection. We're in this together, then correction. Moving to correction, think of possible solutions. Evaluate proposed solutions based on family values. Some of us are great at this, but not so good at connection. Do connection first. Help your child choose a solution. Work with them. I think it's interesting that when you think of stuff like this, you say, but you think of Jesus. There's a verse in the Bible. It says about him that he said, now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? And the worship team, come on up. We're going to have a closing song. Jesus said, now my heart is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. And what happened with Jesus? He said, now is my heart troubled. He had a capacity to listen to his feelings. That's what it was. But he wasn't controlled by his feelings. It wasn't, what should I say? Father, save me from this hour, which is what his feelings were telling him. Don't do it. Save yourself. And what he said, he listened to them. He didn't deny them, didn't repress them. He heard them. But then he spoke to them because he had an ability to remain calm. He said, what am I going to do? Say, save me? No. Father, glorify your name. And again, Jesus is a model for us of somebody who was able to connect with the Father, to quiet his heart, and move in the direction the Father wanted him.
Heavenly Father, we are grateful. Grateful to you for your goodness to us, for the grace you show us, and for the love that you put on us, that you give to us, that you bless us with. We're glad that you reach down to us, that you connect with us. And in that relationship, then you help us grow in you. We're grateful for that. Now go with us today with your guidance, the work of your Spirit in our hearts and lives. In Jesus' name, amen.